The morning my grandmother was buried, my brother pulled me aside before we even left the cemetery and said, "You know the house goes to me, right?" I didn't answer him. I just looked at him standing there in his black coat, already doing the math in his head, and I thought, she's not even in the ground yet. My grandmother, Mère Joëlle, had lived in the same 3-story Victorian in Westmount for 41 years. The kind of house that has a name in the neighborhood. Not because anyone gave it one, but because it just does. The neighbors called it the Blue House, even though the paint had faded to something closer to gray. She had a garden in the back that she tended herself until she was 78. She made tourtière from scratch every Christmas and refused to share the recipe with anyone except me. She used to say, "Adele, you are the only one in this family who sits still long enough to learn anything." She was right about that. My brother Trevor is 4 years older than me and has been in some form of financial trouble since he was 19. Not the quiet kind, the loud kind, where people find out, where things get awkward at family dinners, where my parents spend entire weekends on the phone with him and never mention it to me because I am, apparently, the one who is fine. I've always been the one who is fine. I work as a records coordinator at a hospital in Montreal. I have a small apartment in Plateau, Montreal. I take care of myself. Nobody worries about me, which sounds like a compliment but is mostly just a way of saying nobody pays attention. Mère Joëlle paid attention. She called me every Sunday. She remembered that I didn't like cilantro, that I'd wanted to be a marine biologist until I was 15, that my first heartbreak was a boy named something I've since decided to forget. She asked about my job, my friends, whether I was sleeping enough. She was the only person in my family who treated me like I existed when nothing was going wrong. When she passed, quietly, in her sleep, in February, I flew to Montreal from Ottawa, where I'd been at a conference, and went straight to her house. My parents were already there. Trevor was already there, and the air in that house had that particular quality that comes after someone leaves it. Not empty exactly, but rearranged. Like every object was in the same place, but nothing was where it used to be. The lawyer's appointment was 3 days after the funeral. I remember sitting in that office in downtown Montreal, all glass and pale wood, the kind of office that signals seriousness without warmth, and listening to a man named Mr. Gadgen read my grandmother's will out loud. My parents were on one side of me. Trevor was on the other. And when Mr. Gadgen, Gagnon reached the part about the house, I felt Trevor go still. Mère Joëlle left the house to me. She left Trevor a sum of money, not small, about $40,000, and some furniture he'd always admired. She left my parents some jewelry and the contents of her china cabinet. But the house, the Blue House in Westmount, she left to me. Trevor didn't say anything in the office. He was very quiet the whole drive back. My mother kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror with this look on her face I recognized, the one she uses when she's trying to gauge how bad the storm is going to be. It came that evening. We were all still at the house, packing a few things, and Trevor found me in the kitchen and said the house should be sold. The money split evenly, that this was what Mamelle would have wanted, which was interesting, because Mamelle had just told us exactly what she wanted, in writing. With a lawyer present. I said I wasn't selling. He looked at me like I'd said something in a language he didn't speak. "You can't afford to maintain that house," he said. "You're a hospital clerk." "Records coordinator," I said. Same thing. I told him I would figure it out. I told him the house was mine and I was going to keep it. And that was the end of the conversation, or so I thought. The next 6 weeks were the strangest of my life, and I have had some genuinely strange weeks. It started with small things. My mother calling to check in more than usual, always steering the conversation back to the house, always saying things like, "Trevor's just worried about you, you know. That neighborhood, the property taxes, it's a lot of responsibility." Then my father, who never calls me unprompted, leaving a voicemail about how selling might be the smart move financially. Then Trevor texting me links to real estate listings in Westmount, unsolicited. Like a contractor who keeps showing up even after you've said no. I didn't engage. I spoke to a financial advisor, a woman named Patricia who worked out of an office in NDG and was refreshingly blunt, and she told me I could absolutely carry the house with some restructuring. It wasn't comfortable, but it was possible. I started making plans. I reached out to a contractor about the roof. I called the city about the heritage designation. I was, for the first time in a long time, building something. Then my parents came to visit. They showed up on a Saturday in April with groceries. Actual groceries, bags of them. The kind of visit that announces itself as a kindness and then becomes something else. My mother made soup. My father walked around the house with his hands in his pockets, nodding at things, and I watched him do it and felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up, though I couldn't have told you why. After dinner, they sat me down. Trevor, they said, had found evidence that Mère Julelle had been not herself in the months before she died. They were concerned the will didn't reflect her true wishes. They had spoken to a lawyer. They were considering a challenge. I put down my tea. I asked them what evidence. My mother reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. Inside were printed emails, supposedly from my grandmother's account, that said things like, "I am confused about my finances, and I am not sure I trust my own memory lately." There were notes, allegedly in her handwriting, that seemed disorganized, fragmented. There was a letter, dated 2 months before her death, in which she apparently expressed uncertainty about her decisions. I looked at these documents for a long time. My grandmother had been the sharpest person I knew. She'd done the devoir crossword in pen, in French, every morning until the week before she was hospitalized. She'd managed her own investments. She'd reviewed her will with Mr. Gagnon less than 6 months before she died and, according to him, had been entirely lucid and deliberate. She'd called me 4 days before she passed and told me about a documentary she'd watched about deep-sea fish and asked me if I remembered wanting to be a marine biologist. These documents were not her. I said so. My father said I was being emotional. My mother said they weren't trying to take anything from me. They just wanted to make sure everything was above board. Trevor, who was not there but whose fingerprints were all over this, had apparently already retained a lawyer who specialized in estate disputes. I showed them to the door. That night, I sat in my grandmother's kitchen. My kitchen, I had to keep reminding myself, and I thought about what she used to say. She used to say that the people who love you loudest are sometimes the ones you need to watch most carefully. She wasn't a cynical woman. She was just honest. I called Patricia the next morning. Then I called Mr. Gagnon. Then I called a litigation lawyer named Miss Tremblay, who came recommended by a colleague at the hospital, and who had a very calm voice and a very sharp mind. And I told her everything. Miss Tremblay asked me one question before I'd even finished. Do you have anything in your grandmother's own words, recent, that speaks to her mental state? I thought about it. And then I remembered something. 3 months before Mère Joëlle died, she'd asked me to help her set up a tablet. She was not particularly tech-savvy, but she wanted to video call my cousin who had moved to Vancouver. I'd spent an afternoon at her house walking her through it, and at some point, she'd started recording herself by accident and produced a 45-minute video of herself talking to the camera, narrating her own life. Talking about the house, about her garden, about her plans for the spring. She hadn't realized she was recording. She'd called it the funniest mistake I've ever made and asked me to delete it. I had not deleted it. I don't know why I kept it. I told myself at the time it was because I thought she'd want it eventually, that someday it would be something she'd like to have. Maybe that was true. Maybe some part of me had already understood something I hadn't yet put into words. I sent the video to Ms. Tremblay. The estate challenge came formally in May. Trevor, through his lawyer, a man named Mr. Kemp, Beaumont, who had a reputation for being aggressive in exactly the way that reads as competent to people who don't know what competence actually looks like, filed a claim arguing that my grandmother had lacked testamentary capacity and that the will had been made under undue influence. The undue influence, they claimed, was mine. They were claiming I had manipulated an elderly woman into leaving me her house. I want to say something about what that feels like, because I don't think people who haven't been through it can quite imagine it. It's not just anger. It's this particular cold thing, like the floor has shifted under you and now nothing is level. The people who should know you best are standing in a courtroom saying you are capable of preying on a dying woman. And somewhere underneath the anger is this terrible, quiet grief, because the woman they're talking about is gone and can't defend you herself, and you know she would have wanted to, and that is its own kind of loss. The hearing was in June. I want to tell you about walking into that room. I want to tell you what it is like to sit across from your brother, your own parents, and have them look at you like you are a stranger who has done something wrong. My mother was wearing the gray blazer she wears to things she considers serious. My father was looking at the table. Trevor was looking at me with an expression I can only describe as calculated, not angry, not sad, just strategic. Mr. Beaumont presented his case with considerable confidence. He had the printed emails. He had the handwritten notes. He had a psychiatric assessment, obtained how, I still don't entirely know, that suggested Mère Joelle had shown signs of cognitive decline in the months before her death. He had my parents who testified quietly and carefully that they had been concerned about her mental state. Miss Ricotta Tremblay let him finish. Then she played the video. 45 minutes of my grandmother sitting in the kitchen I grew up visiting, talking to a tablet she didn't realize was recording her. Talking about the house and how she'd always meant for it to stay in the family, by which she meant stay with someone who would take care of it. Talking about Trevor, not unkindly, but honestly, about how she worried about him, how she'd tried to help him over the years, how she'd given him money before and watched it disappear and not wanted to do that to the house. Talking about me. Saying my name and saying that she trusted me. Saying, specifically, that she had spoken to her lawyer and that she had thought very carefully about her decisions and that she was sure of them. I know what I want, she said at one point, to no one, to a camera she didn't know was on. I'm old, not confused. The room was very quiet. Ms. Myers, Tremblay asked only one question of Trevor when she had the chance. Had your grandmother ever, to your knowledge, expressed a wish for the house to be sold? Trevor hesitated. She talked about the family, he said. That's not what I asked. He didn't answer. The judge took a recess. When she returned, she was brief. The video, she said, in combination with Mr. Gaginon's testimony and the medical records from my grandmother's own physician, who had seen her regularly and noted no cognitive decline, was sufficient to dismiss the challenge. The will stood. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that. I felt exhausted and sad and like I'd just watched something break that could not be repaired. My mother cried in the hallway afterward. I don't know what she was crying about. I didn't ask. Trevor walked past me without speaking. His lawyer was already on his phone. My father stopped. He looked at me for a long moment, and I thought he might say something, and then he looked away. And that was that. I went home to the Blue House. I sat in my grandmother's garden for a long time that evening. The perennials were coming in. She'd planted them herself, years ago, the kind that come back every year whether you tend them or not. There were peonies and hostas and the climbing rose along the back fence that had survived 3 Quebec winters and showed absolutely no sign of stopping. I thought about what she would have said. I think she would have been unsurprised. She used to tell me that people show you who they are when there's something at stake. She didn't say it bitterly. She said it like a fact. Like the way she'd tell me the temperature at which butter browns or how to know when bread dough is ready. Just something you need to know to navigate. I have not spoken to Trevor since the hearing. I have not heard from him directly. I heard through a relative that he's working with a new financial advisor, which I genuinely hope is true. My parents and I don't know what we are. We speak. It's careful. There are things we don't say, which take up most of the space in every conversation. My mother asked me at Christmas whether I'd made any decisions about the house. And I told her yes, I decided to stay, and she nodded and changed the subject, and we ate the tourtière I had made from my grandmother's recipe, which I had written down carefully, in the kitchen where she'd taught it to me, and nobody mentioned the trial. I hired a contractor for the roof in September. The heritage designation came through in October. I found in a box in the basement a folder of old photographs, my grandmother as a young woman in the same garden squinting into the sun. I had them framed and hung them in the hallway. Last Sunday I made the crossword, in pen, in French. I didn't finish it, but I think that's fine. I'm still learning. The house is mine. The garden comes back every year. Some things, it turns out, are more durable than the people who try to take them from you. I keep coming back to the 45-minute video. Not the part where it was played in court, not the moment Trevor's expression changed, but the afternoon it was made. My grandmother, alone in her kitchen, talking to a tablet she didn't know was recording, saying out loud to no one exactly who she was and what she wanted. She wasn't performing. She wasn't preparing for anything. She was just herself, which turned out to be the most powerful thing she could have left behind. I think about what it actually takes to get to that place, where your character, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon with no audience, is the same as it would be in front of a judge. That's not something you build overnight. Mamher Joelle spent decades being exactly who she said she was. She helped people quietly. She told the truth even when it cost her something. She made decisions carefully and stood behind them. And when it mattered most, all of that showed up in 45 minutes of accidental footage that no lawyer could argue with. Trevor had the resources, the connections, the professional help. He had documents that looked official and a strategy that looked airtight. What he didn't have was a life that held up under examination. Because when you build a case on manipulation, when your whole position depends on other people not being able to see clearly, you are always one piece of evidence away from collapse. That's not luck. That's consequence. What you do accumulates quietly and eventually it speaks. I don't think I'm a particularly courageous person. I didn't go into that hearing feeling brave. I went in feeling exhausted and sad and honestly a little stunned that it had come to this at all. But I had done the work of paying attention. I'd listened to my grandmother when she talked. I'd learned her recipe, called her on Sundays, sat still long enough to understand who she actually was. And when the moment came, I knew what I had, and I knew it was real. That's not heroism. That's just what happens when you take the people in your life seriously while you still have them. What I've learned, what I keep learning, honestly, because it doesn't sink in all at once, is that the qualities that actually protect you are the ones nobody notices in the moment. Being honest when it's inconvenient, thinking carefully before you act, staying steady when things get hard. Not because you're performing steadiness, but because you've practiced it enough that it's just how you move through things. Those aren't dramatic qualities. They don't make for a good opening argument. But they accumulate the same way consequence accumulates, and eventually you find yourself standing on ground that holds. My grandmother knew that. She taught it to me the same way she taught me to make tricière, not as a lesson, just as a way of being in a room together. I didn't realize I was learning anything. I just thought I was spending time with someone I loved. The rose along the back fence bloomed again this spring. I didn't do anything to encourage it. It just came back, the way it always has, because that's what it does.